Hello, I'm Dr. Amy Van Shagen, and I'm an associate professor in our child development department and also the program director for our master's in child development. I'm going to be talking to you in this lecture about careers, more specifically about becoming a researcher. So a little bit of my background, I have experience in kind of all the different levels of being a researcher, so I'll definitely be incorporating some of my own experiences throughout the lecture today. So be sure to listen to the audio on the different slides. So on the next one, we'll just go over what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start really at the very base of things. What is a researcher? So what kinds of things can you anticipate doing as a researcher? The different types of research that can be done, the types of research institutions, as there are many different kinds, and what types of careers involve conducting research or being a part of research, and what do I need in order to gain the position in research. So I really want to give you a sense of all the different types of research positions, as well as kind of the general requirements or things that you could be doing now that could help make you more marketable for research positions in the future, or even help you figure out whether research is a path that you might be curious about. So, a child development researcher is really someone who seeks to understand, analyze, and share information regarding children's development using a systematic approach. And there are really multiple ways in which a child development researcher might go about studying a particular topic or a particular area. So examining context. So for example, the impact of the school or the teacher-child relationship on a child's social emotional development would be an example. But researchers also can look at things like genetics, physiological responses, so responses to stress in relation to maybe experiencing something new or experiencing a transition with their parent, as well as using developmental assessments. And we'll talk more about kind of the different types of research on the next slide. But as a child development researcher, if you are the primary investigator of that particular research project, then one of the other key pieces generally within research is having some sort of funding. So the amount of funding that you need really depends on the type of research you're doing. So for example, for me, I typically do community-based, action-based research. And I'll kind of describe that in a moment. But because my research typically is done within the community, I'm not needing to have funding for a laboratory space or lots of materials to go into a laboratory space. Much of the funding that I'm requesting from grants and from funders really focuses in on things like compensation for participants for their time. It might include travel funding if, for example, I'm having researchers go out to different childcare centers, and funding that might have to do with general materials. So if I have a survey, or if I need audio recorders for interviews or things like that, transcriptions. So funding is going to look different based off of really the needs of that particular research study. And again, that can really vary. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is that, being a child development researcher does not require you to directly examine children. Some folks do, right? Some folks study children and, observe children either in classroom settings or home settings or in the lab setting. But for others, you may be really studying more about other aspects of the context, other things that may be influencing or impacting child development, such as the classroom, the home environment, even resources within a community setting. So I just wanted to put that out there. This video is talking about having a career in research more generally, but it talks about the research arc, which I think is the helpful way to kind of look at kind of the different steps towards being a research assistant, moving all the way into having a PhD and having an academic position or something like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about those different aspects, but I thought this was a nice kind of beginning step to look at. This is a particular program that provides additional supports as well, so you'll hear that in the discussion too. So before I go into the types of research, I did want to touch a little bit more on what my specific area of focus is for research. So my focus area generally has always been early childhood education, and that includes ages birth through age 7. And I typically am in the range of birth to 5 because those are the ages of the children that are most often served in childcare settings, and that's typically where I have my research around. So I consider myself a child development researcher or a social scientist researcher, and I typically do community-based and action-based research. It's what I most closely connect with, and I feel like for me, it's important within my research to feel like there can be a direct impact from the research that I'm doing. And so for me, community-based research, so using a community sample, using a natural environment, so for me, childcare settings, teachers in those settings, and then action-based research. So with action-based research, the goal is really using the results to create recommendations or change. So for right now, I am currently wrapping up a research study that's funded by First Five San Bernardino and kind of in collaboration with Quality Start San Bernardino. And I'm looking at potential experiences of racial inequity within our early childhood system. So specifically, I am doing surveys as well as interviews with early childhood teachers, particularly teachers of color who have experienced or potentially have experienced racism, discrimination based on the color of their skin, and really examining what that looks like, as well as system level pieces. So is there a wage discrepancy based on race within our county and things like that. So once that research, all that data is collected, then I'll be analyzing that, and then I'll be sharing the results of that with our county, of course anonymously from the participants. But it's an opportunity for us to then create really thoughtful recommendations for how we can really address some of these experiences of racism and discrimination, and be really mindful about then the other aspect of talking about race and racism, which is how do teachers generally report discussing race and racism with young children, and what materials might they have in their classroom or not to talk about these topics and have it be integrated into daily interactions. So that kind of gives you an understanding of the community-based and the action-based research part. There are also other formats that are used in research, and if you're working with others who are conducting research, that it might be in a laboratory, conducted with as little outside influence as possible. So typically when folks are using a laboratory setting, it's because they want to try and really hone in on one particular aspect of something and try and get rid of all the other kind of distractors. And so there's different schools of thought on that, of course. But an example of this would be, a well-known study around attachment. So the strange situation, if you Google the strange situation, it will definitely come up. You can watch a video of it if you haven't seen it in any of your classes yet. But it was done in a laboratory setting to really examine the different types of attachments, secure and insecure attachments, and the variance of that within a lab setting. And so that is different within the way that measures are done. Those observations were done in a laboratory setting, but observations can also be done in what we call a natural environment. A natural environment would be a place that we would consider children to be at on a regular, typical basis. So school or childcare would be a natural environment, as well as the home environments. So I've done a mixture of both, but I primarily have done observations in the natural environment. So I also was a part of a study when I was in graduate school, where we did observations in participants' homes. So it was mothers and babies, and we did those observations and did video and things like that in the natural environment. Other formats are also the national and international samples. So these tend to be large surveys that might go out to a nationally representative sample, or even across countries, to gather as much information as possible from all different folks. And then for measures, I've kind of touched on surveys. Surveys can also be conducted with children, families, or teachers. Of course, the caveat with children is that children would have to be old enough to either understand someone reading out loud and then answering the question, or being able to read themselves. Observations as well as interviews. So these are just some examples of the different types of formats as well as measures that you may come in contact with if you are having a career in research. There are also more than one type of research institution in which someone can have a research career, and even particularly focused in child development. I think one of the most common ones that folks think about is academia. So, similar to my type of position, so being at a university and having a tenure track position, it's pretty typical that part of the expectation of receiving tenure and being a tenure track faculty member is that, yes, you are teaching, but you are also conducting research and looking to sustain funding for that research and bring in funding to the university, and really be putting out meaningful research into the larger field of knowledge. And so as part of an example, I also put oftentimes at universities there will be institutes or centers. And so at CSUSB we have the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations. The green underlined text always has a hyperlink to it, so feel free to check out the ICDFR website. But many of us faculty in the Child Development Department are also part of the ICDFR. And so it really just helps provide some additional resources to us as faculty members, so that we can really focus on the research that we're doing. And then there are additional supports at the ICDFR to help with some of the more monotonous pieces around budgeting or payroll or purchasing, things like that. And so it's a really wonderful resource, and it also provides a lot of outreach to the community as well. So definitely check that out. We also often are hiring at the ICDFR, sometimes for student research assistant positions, as well as full-time positions. And so that might be something that you want to explore as well. Another entity that has researcher positions includes public sector, so federal and state funded programs, things like public school districts, the CDC, health and human services, which is also federal, as well as some more state and federal kind of mixed funding programs. So WestEd, the Child Care Resource Center, these are all places where research is being conducted within the community, and so they definitely require research associates, folks with experience with statistics, as well as just general data collection and data experience. And then there's also the private, or what we would call the corporate research and development sector. And so these are often times foundations that have funding, and they fund specific types of research. And so then you would want to find ones that specifically have to do with child development to see if they're hiring. But the example that I wanted to provide was the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, because I know specifically that they fund projects around early childhood and child development, and they are what's considered a private corporation. So they're privately funded, but they have their own set of researchers as well, and opportunities for research to be conducted. So, if you're considering a career in research, which you may or may not be thinking about right now, but it might be something that you want to explore as you continue through the child development degree program. So, these are different types of careers that you can have within research, and they do kind of build off of one another. So, a research assistant or a program specialist would really be at the base of the career ladder. And then at the very top would be a primary investigator or PI. So now we'll kind of go through each of them. But for a research assistant or program specialist, they tend to implement primary investigators' research. So a research assistant isn't necessarily developing their own research studies or implementing them. They are more likely really working on the goals of a PI's research or a federally funded grant. So, for example, I have several research assistants working on the racial equity research project that I currently have. And so those research assistants have been helping with recruitment of participants, with sending out surveys, with conducting interviews, and then with data entry and organization and things like that. And so that's really what you can anticipate as a research assistant or program specialist. I will say that with all of these positions, you really want to look at the particular job description and the requirements for it, because sometimes we use terms differently depending on the particular institution or the particular program that has the research. So, for example, this is how we define a research assistant or a program specialist. However, someone else might define a program specialist more like a research associate. So just keep that in mind, that you really want to look at the job description. That would be the most important piece to understand whether A, you're qualified for the position, and B, whether it's doing things that you are interested in. A research associate is the same as a research assistant, but may also do statistical analyses. They may oversee the research assistants to some extent, or kind of help mentor them. They may have a little bit more hands in the data, for example. So a research associate might have more experience with the statistical analysis, so then they may also be helping more with cleaning the data, double checking the data, ensuring that the protocol is being followed appropriately. And for example, if someone was going out in the community to conduct research and it was a research associate and a research assistant, the research associate would more likely be the one to lead that interaction with the participant, while the research assistant kind of helps with whatever the associate needs. And then we have project coordinator or project analyst. So this individual oversees the day-to-day needs of the research study and other research positions. And they typically work directly with the PI on a regular basis. So a project coordinator, it's really important for them to be able to have the experiences of having already done all of those things like recruitment, data collection, data entry, have a really deep understanding of what it takes to conduct a research study successfully, as well as having some managerial skills. As a project coordinator typically will kind of troubleshoot any types of problems that may arise, as well as helping kind of oversee the research assistant and associates involved in the project. So they're really involved in the implementation of the PI's research project. The primary investigator, at that point when you are a PI, if you're in academia in the tenure track position, or if you're a PI at a particular publicly funded or private sector research institute, you're really creating the research projects, as well as having the expectation of writing up the results for publications, for conferences. And another big aspect of a PI is really seeking that funding to continue the research. as well as supervising and consulting on the progress of the research study, ensuring that specific benchmarks are being made for a grant, for example, or that, the re-strategizing if, the recruitment strategy isn't working as well as anticipated, things like that. So I did kind of want to etch out education levels for careers in research of the ones that we discussed in the previous slide, with the caveat that education requirements may vary based on the specific job description, as I mentioned before, just like the job title might vary. But generally for a research assistant or program specialist, you need a bachelor's in a related field. And this is really where, when I'm saying research assistant or program specialist, I'm talking about a full-time funded position. So we have research assistants that are student research assistants or graduate research assistants. And so those are students that are either currently in our child development undergraduate program or maybe in our graduate program. And so for those positions, they're not considered full-time, and our expectation is that it's going to be a lot of a learning experience too. So it gives students an opportunity to really get hands-on experience while they're also helping with a research project or general research. A research associate, this can really vary based on the job, but you definitely need at least a bachelor's in a related field, but typically a master's degree is preferred because there's typically more research experience and statistical analyses and things like that that come along with having a master's degree, and must have research experience. And then a program coordinator, a master's degree at minimum, research experience, typically experience supervising others. And I will say that with a research associate, sometimes they do even require a PhD. So it really does depend. I had a friend in graduate school that after she graduated, she took a research associate position, and that required a PhD. And so she did a lot of heavy kind of statistical analyses and really being in these large data sets and, writing things up around them. So in that particular position, the research associate definition looked different than the one that I've provided. Again, the ones that I'm providing really are associated with kind of how we view them at CSUSB, and also how I've seen them used at previous universities that I've been at. And then, the academic position or PI of grant-funded research almost always require a PhD or doctorate degree. Really having the additional schooling, additional expertise, additional experience in order to even qualify for federally funded grants and things like that. So by this point, you may be wondering, what can I do if I'm interested in, a position in research? First, I just want to reiterate that you can absolutely have a career in research with a bachelor's degree. And, being able to gain research experience early on, so while you're in your bachelor's degree, is just going to make you more competitive for those research assistant and associate positions. So some of the recommendations I have are completing the city training for human subjects. So this is located on our CSUSB website for the IRB, which is the Institutional Review Board for Human Subjects and Ethics. And there's a particular training, so I included the link to the website. And if you're going to be working on research with any faculty member or with the ICDFR, anything like that, you would be required to have this certification. But it also really gets you immersed in thinking about conducting research with humans and ethical considerations around that. So it's a great certification to have. It's free to do, and then you have your certificate. And then that also makes it a lot easier for when you're approaching faculty members, because you can also share that you already have this qualification. Another recommendation I would have is get research experience during your undergraduate program. I think I kind of have alluded to that throughout this, but reach out to faculty that are doing things that you're interested in. So I included the link to our faculty page for child development faculty members, and if you click on the names, then you can typically see a description of kind of the different research areas that faculty have. We have a wide array of what different folks are doing in our department, which is of course really exciting. But then you can kind of find one that catches your interest. And so the other pieces to that are gaining experience by attending and presenting at conferences. So there are lots of local conferences that are done around child development in children, like the California Association for the Education of Young Children, CAUIC. And there's international conferences like the Society for Research on Child Development. And there's lots of other entities as well that really focus on research and cutting edge things around child development at conferences. And it's a great way to network and potentially find employment as well. And faculty members are going to know kind of the best ones that are coming up or might have opportunities for you to help present on particular research and things like that. And so you can also ask faculty members if you can help with a manuscript. So manuscripts are, the large documents that we're creating based off of the analyses and the data that we're collecting. And those manuscripts are then submitted to academic journals for publication. Of course, they go through a review process and things like that, but being able to have your name on a publication and to have some understanding of that process is also going to make you more marketable for research positions upon graduation. And then the final thing that I wanted to share around, what you should be doing now would be, also exploring. CSUSB has a research week, and they have a lot of different opportunities focused in on student research, and one of those is Meeting of the Minds. So I have a link to the research week from last year on here, so you can kind of explore it if you're not familiar with it. So I just wanted to provide a wrap up of kind of talking about careers in research. And so there are multiple ways to have a career in research, as we've talked about, and kind of multiple levels depending on your particular level of degree. I want to reiterate that to move up the research career ladder, you need to have a graduate degree and ultimately a PhD to really be able to establish your own funding and stream of research program. However, there may be reasons why someone may not want to pursue a PhD. They may want to just stay with a bachelor's or a master's degree, and they really enjoy the, getting involved in the hands-on pieces of the research. So doing recruitment and data collection, helping keeping the data all organized and up to date, helping ensure that longitudinal studies are working in a timely manner and things like that. And so that's absolutely okay too. There's no there's no requirement that someone has to have a PhD in order to be involved in research within child development. And there are different options for research institutions. So we talked about both public and private options, including academia, but also things like the Packard Foundation that's privately funded, and then getting involved in research as an undergraduate. I just want to reinforce that, we as faculty members are more than happy to provide opportunities to students to get involved in research and to get that experience. It will definitely help build your resume and your skill set to make you more marketable for those research positions. But it also helps you determine if you like research. If you want to pursue a career in something, you want to ensure that you like it. So even though you're in the child development path and you know that you're passionate about children and families and things like that, it's also important to determine if research is the avenue that you want to pursue for your career. And so being able to get some of that experience while you're in your undergraduate program is really a great opportunity. So I do hope that, myself and other faculty members will hear from some of you if you're interested in getting involved in the research side of our experiences here, and I look forward to hearing from you, and best wishes on exploring all the other aspects of the careers as well as attending graduate school.